First of all, let's be very clear on why AWS Lambda is even important to you. The reason why is it will save you money. In order to fully understand what Lambda does, let's start by taking a trip back to the 1940s. Computers at this time were huge machines only accessible to select groups of people, mainly military researchers and wealthy universities. This is a photo of ENIAC, a computer built in the mid-40s by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania. Throughout the 40s and 50s, computers remained the domain of select groups of people, and it was not until the late 50s that the term personal computer was even coined. One of the earliest PCs, for example, was the IBM 610. And to give you a taste of how cost prohibitive it was to own one of these, the price tag for an IBM 610 in 1957 was $55K USD. This would be about $600K today when taking inflation into account. The high price tag associated with these early computers led people to think of creative ways they could be made more affordable. The earliest techniques involved reserving access by booking time on a calendar, i.e. by the hour or by the day. But this approach did not scale for two main reasons. One, what if the computer was booked when you wanted to use it? And two, there are only so many hours in the day, so this approach would never scale to large numbers of people. This reserving time approach eventually gave way to a system whereby access to the computer was made available through remote terminals, enabling simultaneous or parallel usage via time slicing on the level of milliseconds. In reality, these early computers did not execute anything in parallel, but because the task switching between each instruction sent by each user was so quick, it gave the illusion of parallel usage and enabled the computer to be accessed by more people compared to time sharing on the level of hours or days. Fast forwarding a few decades, we eventually arrive at the creation of the microprocessor, which was most notably commercialized in 1971 by Intel. A microprocessor, for those who don't know, is also called a CPU. The CPU, or microprocessor, is the part of a computer that executes logic. The technique of using microscopes and extremely cheap electrical components to build microprocessors allowed for computers which were previously huge and expensive to be drastically reduced in size and cost. Microprocessors were the technical innovation that gave birth to companies like Microsoft and Apple. Throughout the 1970s, companies used microprocessors to build early versions of what we would now call consumer electronic devices like laptops and desktops. And in 1977, there was a boom in the popular usage of these so-called PCs or personal computers. Here is what my research has told me were the best-selling PCs on the market in 1977. The bestseller that year was the Tandy TRS-80 Model 1, priced around $600 USD, which would be $3K today. That was followed by the Apple II, which was priced around $1,300 USD, which would be $6K today. And then third was the Commodore PET, which was priced around $800 USD, which would be $4K today. There were many other PCs released in the late 70s, but these three models are often referred to in history as the Trinity of personal computing. In parallel to the growth of personal computing was the growth of the internet, which crystallized in the early 1990s with the development of the HTTP protocol. For those who don't know what HTTP is, it is the set of rules by which most of the information on the internet is moved between computers, even to this day. The global growth of the internet led to the development of new applications such as email servers and websites. And the nature of these new types of applications required they be made available 24/7, which reintroduced the same flavor of problems that plagued early mainframe computers. Namely, how should they be designed so that more people can gain access to them? The cost and hassle of running internet applications like mail servers, websites, etc. was and still is quite cumbersome and time-consuming. So the late 1990s and 2000s resulted in the formation of hosting companies like GeoCities and GoDaddy. In the 90s and early 2000s, the standard practice of running your own internet application for most people involved renting physical computers from a hosting provider, usually in the interval of months. The problems many had with this approach were, 1, if you weren't making use of the computers you were renting out all month long, you would be paying for time you didn't need. 2, individual machines tended to be rented out one at a time, So you would not be able to pay in fractions of the total price if what you really needed was a fraction of the computational resources sitting inside a machine. And 3, if you needed to install additional software, it could affect the other users of the machine. These problems led to the need for a technique whereby physical machines could be partitioned. Each partition would allow the physical machines to be rented out in chunks of its full capacity. The name for this technique is called virtualization. Virtualization involves using software to emulate multiple standalone computers on a physical machine. 2 virtual machines with half the computational resources of a full physical machine would allow a single machine to service 2 customers who needed dedicated, memory-isolated, 24/7 usage. Memory isolation is what would allow each customer to install their favorite softwares without affecting other customers using the same underlying machine. 4 virtual machines with a quarter of the resources of the full physical machine would allow a single machine to service 4 customers. I hope you see the pattern. Virtualization had its origins in the 60s, but it was companies like VMware, Citrix, and Oracle, among others in the 2000s, that pioneered its commercialization across the globe. Of course, things did not stop there. Yes, you could now pay for smaller fractions of what you needed in regards to computational resources, but smart people noticed another opportunity for fractionalizing resources even further. The technique I am now referring to is called containerization. The difference between containerization and virtualization involves sharing core operating system code across groups of applications running on a physical machine, as compared to allocating dedicated virtual machines with identical copies of core operating system code for each application running on the physical machine. While on principle, this may raise security concerns, the addition of software emulating memory isolation features for each container have shown this approach to be a viable one in reducing the barrier of entry for leveraging internet-connected computers. If you've ever heard of Docker, Docker is the leading containerization software in the world. Plus, it's free and it's open source. This long preamble now allows you to fully grasp what AWS Lambda does. AWS Lambda and similar services like GCF and Azure Functions store your application code in containerized formats and will listen for invocations of your application code coming from the internet. If the Lambda instance you're using receives a request to call your code, it will 1. Load it into RAM from cheaper memory storage locations that are geographically co-located with the operating system executing your code to avoid data transfer fees. 2. Execute it on the same operating system components as everyone else who is using the same Lambda instance you are. And 3. Once your code is finished executing, it will kill your code immediately to make space for other code to be ran on the CPU. The economic result of this is that you only pay for the computational resources you actually use. While AWS Lambda is not appropriate for all scenarios, there are many applications running on the internet nowadays that cost tens, hundreds, or even thousands of dollars per month that can be redesigned using containerization plus Lambda-like techniques to cost pennies per month. You can schedule an appointment today at cmdlabs.io to explore how your cloud bill can be drastically reduced through the use of modern software techniques like AWS Lambda.